Bean thought about the TV camera. He wondered why that it didn't work. He had no way of knowing that the full strength lunar sunlight had burned the light sensitive coating right off of the Vidicon, that it was beyond hope of repair. The camera should have been ready in time for them to train with it at the Cape, but all they had was a block of wood. All he knew was that somehow he had managed to screw it up. But there was nothing that he could do about it now. Bean thought about the surveyor. Over dinner, he and Conrad had talked about how the shadowed crater wall looked so steep they might not be able to walk along it safely. They would have to wait and see. For now, Bean knew he had to get some rest, or his performance would utterly suffer. If you're not doing something productive, Bean told himself, you should be sleeping. Finally, he drifted off into a light slumber. Meanwhile, in the top bunk, Pete Conrad soon awoke, not because his mind was too active, but instead because he was in pain. The right leg of his spacesuit had been misadjusted before the flight and was slightly too short. Now, as he lay in his hammock, his suit bore down on his shoulder like a vice. He called down to Bean and told him they would have to do something about it before the moonwalk. They got up, took down the hammocks, and then, while Conrad sat on the Ascent engine cover, Bean set to work. The leg of the suit was adjusted by a set of cords laced around the calf-like sutures. Bean had to undo each cord, which was tightly knotted, because nobody wanted it to come undone. Let it out a little, and then retie it. The whole process took about an hour. Then Conrad called Houston, 2 hours ahead of schedule, and the two men began the new day. Morning lasts for a week on our moon. For 7 days, the sun slowly climbs in the black lunar sky, shrinking the shadows of rocks and craters. By lunar noon, temperatures climb to 225 degrees Fahrenheit. It takes another week for the sun to descend and then vanish below the western horizon. During the frigid 2-week lunar night, temperatures plummet to 243 degrees below zero. Then the cycle begins anew. When Conrad and Bean ended their first moonwalk, it was about 6:30 a.m. local moon time. Nearly 13 hours later, they stepped outside for the second moonwalk. But in lunar time, only half an hour had elapsed. The sun had climbed only a few degrees, and yet everything looked slightly different. It almost seemed to Bean that a new landscape had taken shape while they slept. He kept noticing rocks that he thought that he'd missed the day before. Soon he realized they were the same rocks under different lighting. The colors of the surface, the spectrum of grays and tans and browns that changed as he looked in different directions, seemed a little more vivid. But the real change was in Surveyor Crater. No longer did its walls seem steep and foreboding. It had been transformed into a gentle bowl. Getting to the probe looked to be easy. Along the way, Conrad and Bean would test their skills as lunar field geologists. For years, and especially in the last few months, they'd been schooled in such esoterica as mineral identification, the characteristics of impact craters, the proper techniques for collecting samples. They had perfected their skills on the lava flows in Hawaii and the desert of West Texas. When they left the Earth, they did so not only as pilots, but as surrogates for the geologists who would have given their right arms to be in their place. To save precious minutes on the surface, the geologists had set down ahead of time and planned 4 possible traverses for Conrad and Bean to follow. About 2 weeks before the flight, Conrad decided he wanted to carry maps, and the geologists had quickly drawn them up on a set of photographs. There wasn't time to get them on the official manifest, so Conrad arranged to have them stowed with his personal items. But that wasn't the only unofficial item Conrad had wanted to bring. A long-time collector of hats, he'd arranged for the crew systems people to make a giant blue and white baseball cap that would fit over the top of his space helmet. He was going to put it on and wait for everybody on Earth to notice as he bounded past the TV camera. Unfortunately, nobody could figure out a way to get it into the LEM in secret. Never mind, Conrad had managed to smuggle something else in the pocket of his spacesuit, and when the time came, he and Bean would have their own little caper on the lunar surface. It turned out that Intrepid lay right on Traverse number 4, which followed a sort of misshapen circle around several craters. The geologist had explained before the mission that the moon's craters are like natural drill holes, that the ferocious energy of meteorite impacts had blasted chunks of rock from the crust and scattered them across the moon. Each crater of the snowman was nothing less than a ready-made excavation into lunar history. By visiting different craters, the geologist hoped the moonwalkers would find out whether the lava flows that formed this region of the Ocean of Storms varied in age and composition. On Earth, a geologist would have spent many days or even weeks on this kind of exploration, but the timeline gave Conrad and Bean a bit less than 2.5 hours to get around the circle. Mindful of all they would try to accomplish, Conrad and Bean assembled a small assortment of gear: rock hammers, sample bags, core tubes, shovel, tongs, and maps, loaded them onto a portable tool carrier, and set off on a journey across the craters. The first stop was the north rim of 360-foot Head Crater, about 100 yards west of the LEM. It didn't take long for the men to make a discovery. Bean looked at the places where Conrad boots had dug into the gray soil and saw that they had uncovered a lighter gray just underneath the surface. They could not hear the excited shouts of the geologists in the back room down the hall from Mission Control, but they knew they had found something significant. Before the mission, the geologists had told Conrad and Bean to look for evidence of a light-colored streak that was visible on the unmanned orbiter pictures, material that had probably been ejected from the impact that formed huge Copernicus crater, 230 miles to the north. Now it appeared they had found some. After the mission, this sample would let the geologist determine the age of the impact that formed Copernicus, an important event in lunar history. Conrad knew that he and Bean could easily have spent an hour at any one of these craters, but the geologist wanted as many different types of rocks as possible, and the clock was ticking.